When we read the statement on impact assessment of the International Association of Impact Assessment, we see there's a heavy emphasis on identifying, predicting, communicating what is the development, but not only that, of course, what is the heritage in this case that may be affected. When undertaking a heritage impact assessment, we basically undertake 4 large steps. The initial one is to conduct a baseline review. It is in this step that we identify and understand the location, the number, an inventory of heritage. The second step is the assessment of the significance. So once we've identified what are our heritage resources, we will try and understand how important they are and how they could be affected by the proposed development. The last 2 steps will be covered in other presentations. When we're dealing with World Heritage properties, we initially look at the statement of outstanding universal value. This is a summary as to why the property was included onto the World Heritage List and can be found online. Now, if we do a HIA for a World Heritage site, which is requested by the World Heritage Centre, they are interested in how the action or development will affect the OUV. Now, the OUV is expressed through values, or the criteria, and attributes. It also has a statement of integrity and authenticity. Now, this refers to the condition of the heritage, and a condition is not static and may or will have changed since the nomination. So it's important we have a look at the baseline conditions of the property before we assess the effects of a potential development or action. The OUV, or the nomination, will also have requirements for its protection and management, and so this is also something we will consider. So the integrity relates to the wholeness or the intactness of the heritage property and how it conveys the values it holds. So the integrity can relate to the size of the property, sufficient size to continue to represent the values, and any threats affecting the property. We need to consider, will the values continue to exist after change has occurred? Authenticity relates to only cultural properties. It requires an original, authentic or true cultural expression of the values. It cannot be represented by a copy or a recreation. World Heritage is selected within 10 criteria, of which 6 are relevant for cultural heritage. The OUV statement has some description as to why a World Heritage property is considered exceptional, different, or special. These criteria can include a wide range of heritage typologies, such as cultural landscapes, ecosystems, architectural complexes, human settlements, archaeological sites, industrial heritage, sacred places, heritage routes, and many others. So we take the OUV statement and distill the values out of the description. Sometimes it's useful to list the values under broad categories, such as we can see on the screen, and to try and identify which are present in the OUV statement. Once we have identified the values within the OUV, we have to consider that these values are expressed through attributes. So it's often helpful to think of attributes as those elements of a World Heritage property that are the focus of our management and conservation activities, in which we want to protect and pass on for future generations. So they are physical elements, both immovable and movable, but also intangible cultural practices. So in order to keep track and ensure nothing is missed, we can summarize the information we've collected so far into a table. So we have our values and the associated attributes listed. We identify whether they are directly linked to the outstanding universal value or to other types of heritage, national, regional, local. Especially when we're working with a team who has various expertise, a table like this can be handy, so they can just be added to. It might also be useful to keep track as to where the information came from. It ensures professionalism, and at the same time, it shows that the process does not fear peer review. When conducting an HIA, it's imperative to agree and to be clear on what is going to be the study or assessment area. The proposed action or development will have a construction or works area and an area of influence. And so both will have to be part of the heritage impact assessment. I think Ellen will talk a little bit about the importance of understanding and agreeing the assessment area in the scoping report. And I will give you some examples later in the case studies as to why we shouldn't just focus on a property area or buffer zones when considering the influence of a development on our heritage. So what we see here is a simple flow chart of how HIA is implemented. We start with a project, which is proposed by a project proponent and which has been decided by the Heritage Authority or Heritage Department that it requires an HIA. We initially will conduct a desk-based review. This desk-based review is based on existing information. If the existing information is not sufficient to make an assessment, we will collect additional data. The assessment can identify potential adverse impact on heritage. If they are unacceptable, the project alternatives will have to be looked at. It may require a change of location or design. If those changes are proposed, then it needs to go back to the desk-based review and make sure that the alternative design or location can be adequately assessed. If the impacts are acceptable or can be mitigated, we move on to recommending measures. These measures can be prior to a construction phase, during the construction phase, or during operational phases. The importance of the baseline study cannot be overstated. We have to understand what is our heritage before we can feasibly understand what potential impacts could occur from the proposed development or action. So documentation involves both existing material and acquisition of new data where gaps are understood. So we're looking for various types of heritage. We're looking for number, condition, the locations, and ultimately we want to get to what is the significance of the heritage within our area of influence or assessment area. The desk-based study based on existing information which can be found if it's a World Heritage. Of course, we start with the outstanding universal value statement, but we also will be looking at historical documents and secondary work, environmental, ecological, geological, geomorphological information, which can help us understand the setting and the condition of the heritage. We will be looking at map collections, both ancient and new, historical photographs, archival documents, also assessment reports which have already been collected, and existing inventories of heritage within, of course, our study area or assessment area. So the idea is to create a cultural map, layers of information, and come to a statement of significance and a good understanding of the condition and baseline of our heritage. When we have gaps within our knowledge of the baseline, we can go out and collect more information through archaeological investigations, build heritage surveys, also through interviews and collection of stories, but also in some cases condition surveys, condition of the state of preservation of our heritage. So the information collected from both desk base and going out in the field should be detailed enough to provide a project baseline against which the monitoring of results can be compared. Sometimes when we conduct a baseline study, there are reasons why we were unable to collect certain data. And this should be clearly stated, whether it's because of funding, timing, or access to a certain area. Sometimes people also forget that when there's negative results tell us also something about the heritage. And so, again, this needs to be stated in the report. I already alluded at it, but baseline study is not just about making an inventory list of cultural resources. That is just the first step. A heritage resource does not exist within a vacuum. It exists within a setting, it exists within a community, it is affected by various elements. And so it's important to collect as much information as possible and to understand this interconnectedness of the heritage and its environment and processes. Ultimately, we will be assessing whether the project, exacerbates some of the potentially existing negative effects on heritage. It is often useful to go to the community. It can be two ways. One, to go and sort of find out what their layers of knowledge are and to produce it into a map, or to produce a map with the existing information and to see how the community can add and to our understanding of the processes on heritage and the use of it. Why is this cultural mapping important? It involves old, new, continuously developing modes of thinking, being, and creating. In particularly, we now understand that intangible aspects of heritage, which often is held by this knowledge is held by the community. It is an important aspect of heritage and its preservation. Some of the data capture techniques that can be used, it could be first-hand observation or first impressions through sketches, photographs, archival research through old photographs, newspapers, film, postcards, and old. We can access satellite or aerial images, LiDAR surveys, for instance, both old and new. We can use statistical methods, measuring, counting, sampling. We can access local knowledge, do surveys and have interviews with performance, use audio-visual recordings, performance, rituals, and oral. So during the baseline study, we decide and define what and where we are recording heritage resources. We consider tangible as well as intangible data. We use multiple tools, multiple data sets, multiple methods to collect this data. Once it's recorded, we organize it and ideally verify the results with stakeholders, with communities. Then we link the data sets and come to the identification of the heritage significance. So now a small introduction as to how and why we determine heritage significance. So first of all, the why. Why are we determining heritage significance? Outside of HIA, we do it in order to prioritize research, conservation aims, and presentation. Within an impact assessment, it is used to determine the level of impact from said action or development. Now, determining the significance of a site can be highly subjective. So we have to develop a set of criteria, not only develop, but also agree. And this process can be made as objectively as possible. A transparent approach also opens up the process for discussion and improvement. Not everybody in an impact assessment understands heritage, and so it is very important to identify and be very clear about how we came to certain levels of significance. So evaluating heritage, heritage managers tend to expect their sites to be of perhaps a higher significance than can be understood by lay people. And so it is important to be transparent and to involve the stakeholders in the process of identifying the level of significance. So most approaches for defining heritage are based on a type of heritage. We rank them from most important to least important. Some countries have heritage priorities based on various objectives. It can be an institution or a country development priority, and of course for World Heritage, the heritage significance is embedded in the outstanding universal value. Each of these comes with their own set of criteria. Quite often, heritage value is a single value approach. It's to compare the value or the significance from one side against another. You do this based on the site's quality, how significant, or its quantity, how many of this type of site exists anywhere else. Often it's a political or ideological-led choice that can lead to prioritizing a certain type of sites. Even more common is to consider the economic value of heritage in a sector such as tourism. So sites are prioritized and given a higher value because of their potential to be opened up for tourism. Or, on the other hand, sites are given a lower priority when they are in an economic rich development area. The reality, however, is that each heritage site has more than one value that should be considered. A quick example I give here is of Pak U Caves, where, of course, there's a spiritual value as a place of worship. It has historical value because of events that have transpired there for many centuries. Aesthetically, because it's beautiful and it has a unique architecture. Its economic value as a piece of real estate and tourism potential. And, of course, the archaeological value as a place used the locale. So who sets criteria for heritage significance? Often it's
คำถามถัดไปนะคะคือใครคือคนที่มีหน้าที่ในการตั้งเกณฑ์นะคะแล้วก็
of course on an international level
จัดตั้งแล้วก็ออกแบบตัวเกณฑ์ในการให้คุณค่า
can also happen on a national region
ก็สามารถมีได้หลายระดับนะคะทั้งระดับสากลระดับประเทศระดับภูมิภาค
and culminates in lists or registers
แล้วก็ตัวเกณฑ์เหล่านี้เนี่ยก็จะ
Part of our impact assessment, we would access
ผลนะคะในหลากหลายรูปแบบไปขออภัยนะคะแต่ว่าเสียงมันค่อนข้างจะขาดหายไม่ได้ยินเสียงสปีกเกอร์
The set of criteria are often quite specific, and the difference between
ใน criteria เหล่านี้นะคะก็ค่อนข้างที่จะมีความ
minimal. This is an example in Hong
แล้วก็
Kong.
ยกตัวอย่างนะคะนี่คือที่ฮ่องกง
This is the fire dragon of Tai Han, which has made it onto the list of intangible
เทศ
heritage.
กาลชูสิงโตนะคะซึ่งก็จะได้ถูกบรรจุไว้เป็นหนึ่งในมรดกวัฒนธรรมนะคะที่จับต้องไม่ได้
It has not made it to the list.
ขออภัยนะคะไม่แน่ใจว่ามีใครกดไมโครโฟนหรือว่าเปลี่ยนระบบหรือเปล่าเพราะว่าได้ยินเสียงตัวเองเวลาแปลและไม่ได้ยินเสียงสปีกเกอร์จากจอค่ะ Within
a World Heritage, not all heritage resources Countries place different
ตอนนี้รบกวน IT เช็คระบบนิดนึงนะคะตอนนี้ได้ยินเสียงล่ามแปลภาษาไทยอยู่ในช่องภาษาอังกฤษค่ะ
Sorry, everybody, we have a small technical problem with the interpretation channels. We'll just wait 1 second until we can sort it out, then we can go back to the PowerPoint. Am I advancing? Let's try that again and see if it works.
So who sets criteria? As part of our impact assessment, we would access the lists and identify if any of the registered heritage was within our study area. The set of criteria are often quite specific, and the difference between making it on the list and off the list are minimal. This is an example in Hong Kong where this is the fire dragon of Tai Hang, which has made it onto the list of intangible heritage, whereas on this one is just a simple lion dance, and it has not made it to the list. When it comes to World Heritage, we are well familiar with the set of criteria used to identify the values. For cultural heritage, we are looking at masterpieces, we are looking at unique or outstanding examples of heritage. Within a World Heritage, not all heritage resources can be understood to be outstanding, to be unique, or to be a masterpiece. For example, the buildings in the town of Luang Prabang, which form part of the World Heritage Inventory, are described under various categories. For instance, Category 1 are buildings which are part of the outstanding universal value. These are not the sum of the World Heritage, but these buildings are understood to be prioritized for conservation, preservation. Category 2 are buildings which should be preserved and restored, and Category 3 are buildings which merit preservation and restoration, but which may be replaced under certain conditions. Countries place different emphasis on heritage values. They like to highlight specific elements of their country. And so, for instance, here the example is Australia, where when we look at their heritage criteria, they place an emphasis on history, on places, on environments, on community and cultural groups, also creative and technical achievements. Again, community and the association of places and people, as well as indigenous traditions, are held high. The Lao PDL, in their national heritage criteria, place great emphasis on cultural value items. Their intangible cultural heritage has a strong connection to the communities. They also link their heritage to historical development and especially the struggle of the people and the revolutionary leaders. There is also a very strong love of nation, and how that is expressed forms part of the heritage criteria in Laos. When we look at an example for regional criteria for heritage significance, in this case for Hong Kong, we see that Hong Kong places no emphasis on identifying significance for archaeological sites. They only have a system, a three-tier grading system for built heritage. It ranges from buildings which should be preserved to a grade 3, where it only should be preserved if practical. Now, quite interestingly, while the Heritage Authority decides on the grading, there is a possibility for, or is a mechanism for the public to put forward heritage buildings, building structures, or even sites. The evaluation of the nominations then go to the Heritage Authority, who will then decide if they will get a grading or not. These criteria do not come with statutory protection. This is just a guideline on how these buildings should be preserved. So the criteria for grading these buildings and structures in Hong Kong is based on the historical interest, architectural merit, the rarity, built heritage value and authenticity. Does it have group value? Does it have any social value or local interests? But again, archaeological sites, they are not considered. It's not only national and regional governments setting criteria for heritage significance. It can also be institutions such as the Asian Development Bank in this example. They call the heritage physical cultural resources, and they identify that they will include known and listed heritage, but also undiscovered. They consider their heritage resources to be valuable scientific and historical information. They consider them to be assets for economic and social development, and that they are an integral part of people's cultural identity and practices. Very important, they understand that the value of the the value of the heritage resource cannot be replaced. They list specific examples of heritage resources that they will include. This ranges from objects to natural sites to man-made and natural features and movable objects. Setting criteria is not new. We see in this table that this has been going on since 1902, and again, depending on background and places we see that various values are considered in identifying significance. It is good to understand when we're working with existing heritage criteria that they may have some limitations. Sometimes there's only a limited range of heritage sites considered. The values, they were determined by a limited number of specialists or by specialists of a single type of heritage. Criteria often also follow trends and will focus. We then use these data sets to determine the level of importance. And again, it's not a one sort of avenue of assessing these data sets. We might do a comparative analysis, similar sites. We may look at the integrity of the site. We may look at the authenticity of the site. We may look at integrated assessments, compare the heritage sites versus its wider environment. We may also be aware of changing values when determining the level of impact. Especially on a local level, we can say that heritage sites have a public component whereby the public puts certain places forward for preservation, but it's ultimately a heritage authority or body that decides which sites go onto a list. Now, registering of a heritage site implies a level of future management, protection, monitoring, and is as such a financial commitment. Lists are not static. Heritage evolves, the environment evolves, and of course can be affected by outside forces. Also, value changes over time, and they are often strongly shaped by social forces, economic opportunities, and cultural trends. The condition of the heritage sites and their environment has been mentioned a couple of times in this presentation. So, of course, the environment is not only affected by people-led events, natural sources of risk and threat exists. It can be earthquakes, fire, flood, wind and water erosion, insect infestation or vegetation growth, which affects tangible and intangible heritage. Man-made sources of risk and threat is not only from development. It could also be war, theft, illegal trade, urban and rural land use plans, change of urban and rural land use, tourism, or just plain neglect. So it's important to understand and to document the existing impacts and vulnerability at baseline stage. So what actions have already affected the heritage resource? In what way, to what extent or level? Can these impacts be seen and how they are reflected in the heritage resource? It's not only for an impact assessment, but also to determine the significance of the heritage. So claims made in an assessment of significance must be supported by information contained in the analysis, by reference to existing reliable research, or by the attachment of specific justified arguments to the assessment. When we write an HIA, the assessment of significance should be clearly understood by all stakeholders. If it is not about a world heritage or a national heritage or a heritage on a list, then it could be useful to include some of the information in these bullet points. A brief explanation on how we came to the degree of significance understood, a succinct statement on the significance of the place, a statement or a tabulation of the various elements of the place, and a plan or a diagram where these elements are identified. Community engagement and stakeholder consensus are very important parts of an impact assessment. Assuming, however, that an assessment team made out of multidisciplinary representatives and stakeholders will somehow evolve into a coherent impact assessment could be an expensive and time-consuming mistake. The objective should be to engage a number of persons who have the necessary range of skills to come to an adequate assessment of a particular place and development. So whatever the arrangement, multiple contributions are expected and will need to be coordinated. This is not only relevant for assessment of significance, but for HIA as well. Legislation, guidelines, policy contexts, management plans, they all have to be considered as part of the baseline study. It's different for each country, it's different for each area or even type of heritage. So it needs to be researched as part of your baseline study. It's important as it will give not only legitimacy or enforcement potential to the HIA process, but it also may quickly identify that a certain project or action is inappropriate or basically forbidden within a certain place. It doesn't only have to be described, it also needs to come back in the assessment, and it needs to be referred to in various sections, not in the least in the mitigation identifications. Again, I'm not going to go into details of this, but the proposed development or activity, the project basically, is something that needs to be described into detail in the baseline review. The importance of understanding the works and its effect cannot be overstated. Often HIA practitioners know a lot about heritage, but they don't know or understand what the project, how it can potentially affect the heritage. So engineering, construction, operation effects and elements need to be considered into detail in a baseline.